good. So this next topic, we've already heard about the. We've been talking a lot about the landscaping side, and we're going to touch a little bit on that in this next section, but also start to focus a bit more on plants and planting. And the topic of this section, we're going to focus on things like the changing climate. So the title I gave it was Grave New World, which is a bit morbid, but hopefully by the end of it, our lovely panellists, who I'll introduce in a second, will turn it around into something much more positive. So really, just a bit about me. So I'm an early garden designer myself, so I've been practicing for just over 2 years, so I feel still quite new to it, and I'm sure everyone in this room has got much more experience than I have. I'm lucky to be joined by 3 garden designers and horticulturalists who I really look up to and admire. So we've got Nick Howard, Emma Page, and Sarah Wilson, who are all award-winning show garden designers at different show garden events, whether it's Chelsea or Hampton Court, Tufton Park. So really privileged to have these guys on the panel. I thought I'd kick off with just an introduction to the subject around climate change. So we hear lots of horror stories about changes in climate, and it's something I'm really interested in. I think there's 2 parts to the topic around, yes, the planet is warming, but there's also the effects. Is that caused by general warming or by human activity? I'm sure we'll all have quite strong opinions about that. And as I started writing on Monday, I started writing down what I wanted to say in the introduction, and luckily the government released an entire report on it, so I got some nice stats to start the day. So the UN said that CO2 global emissions are up by 1.2% in 2017, which sounds like a small amount, but actually by 2030, so just over 10 years, those CO2 emissions need to be down by 55%, so to go up by 1 is actually significant. The Met Office then said on Monday, chances of summers like 2018 will be 50%. So 50-50, we'll get one of those heat waves and droughts by 2050. And then by 2070, so still a little way in the future, but winters will be up by 4.2 degrees Celsius. So quite a significant shift in UK winters. And rainfall is likely to be 35% more in winters by 2070. And we've seen up in, over the last few years, we've seen flooding in Yorkshire, and around the country, significant flooding. We saw the beast from the east out of nowhere. We then skipped past spring, because that didn't happen. Spring straight into drought in summer. So significant things that we're challenged with. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how in the design sector and as plants people, how do we cope with those challenges? So I'll probably just hand over straight to the panel, I guess. Is this something that you actually see day to day? Do you think it's actually affecting your work already? Is it something you have to deal with?
Morning, everyone. My name's Nick Howard. Yeah, definitely climate change it's affecting all of us, as we know. The challenges for me, particularly as a plantsman, are, and the frustration also with Chelsea this year, as a designer looking at other gardens, is you see these, kind of arid, dry gardens with the Mediterranean leaning with pomegranates and all sorts of exotic plants. They just will not get through our wet winters. They do require a dry winter, and they can take quite cold, but they can't take the wet and cold and the combination of both. I was in Lithuania recently and did a talk there, and it was really interesting to hear that they had really good success with some of the plants that we struggle with here. And I think that's because their climate goes from summer, quite hot continental climate, and then plunges straight into very cold and snow. So then the plants are kind of insulated by the snow and they're cold, so they just basically go straight into dormancy. Whereas we have that kind of wet, warm, heavy clay, and a lot of plants just really don't like it. That is only going to get worse. So as part of the dry summers, we're looking at actually introducing irrigation, which is something I've always been against, because I think that it's, a plant should happily survive in the ground on its own. And then getting the client to actually manage the irrigation correctly, so that the plants don't become reliant on it. So it literally is for just those moments where it's 38 degrees outside. So that's how it's affected us. Passing on to Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly what Nick just said. I think what I would add is that for me, it's become more important than ever to make sure that I'm planting plants in the right positions and in the right types of soil, and trying to educate my clients about that. That's really important, that they take that on board and that they don't have unrealistic expectations when it comes to the design and what plants will work in their garden. So yes, I think that it's definitely affecting my work. Again, the same with Nick for the irrigation. I have always been dead against irrigation. I do believe if a plant can't survive where you put it, then you shouldn't be putting it there. But this year, I've had a lot of new plantings that I've had to irrigate, and I'm hoping that once they've got a year down, their roots down the first year, that going forwards they won't need irrigation. But it's definitely something that I've been doing, and it goes against everything that I kind of believe in. But it has been necessary, sadly, definitely this year.
Hi, not sure what I can add to that actually. Again, dead against irrigation has to happen though. I think the main thing is, as Nick touched on, the unpredictability of the weather. You know, a few years ago we were told that everything was going to get hotter summers and colder winters, but as you said, you know, we have this amazing wet factor as well. So it doesn't make sense to start redesigning everything along one particular scheme or for one particular climate, because we don't seem to know what is going to be thrown at us from one second to the next. So I think all we can do is be site specific, really, you know, go into soil preparation, look at what is around, and build our planting to be as resilient as possible. I think one idea is to go in as much as you can with P9s and, you know, things like that, rather than planting bigger plants that are going to struggle more in harsh conditions. That brings with it the idea of building client expectations. You know, do they want to see a garden full of P9s and a lot of bare earth? So that comes with its own issues. But yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
I just had a question around the hard landscaping actually, and so we hear a lot in the gardening press around things like rain gardens and other ways of actual landscaping elements that deal with all of this change. So for water runoff, those rain gardens can cope with the flooding a little bit, planting more trees. I wondered if have you actually stopped and thought and had to change any of your designs, or have you changed your design style to try and adapt and use some of these elements or something like it?
I'm a big fan of the plantsman, there's two of them, Nigel Dunnett and James Hitchmo. James Hitchmo particularly I follow on Instagram, and actually it's one of the most informative Instagram feeds that I follow with regard to planting for rain gardens and kind of sustainability. There's then the problem of actually doing that for the plant's benefit and the maintenance or the maintenance requirements, because it's, you know, he advocates a very deep gravel mulch. So basically you plant the plant in gravel, so it's the base of the root ball is touching soil. That's quite a hard thing to sell on to a client. Great for a public space or a car park or something like that, where you're, you know, I'm not a fan of the, you know, the big kind of shrub plantings that, you know, where you have cornus winter stems that are dreadfully clipped and things like that. So I can see a real benefit for that for public space, but actually for the domestic client, quite tricky.
I started doing garden design seriously in 2015, and for over the last couple of years, I found it increasingly hard to get excited about the projects I was working on, to deal with clients, to actually in all good conscience work on the sites that I was working on. So I suddenly realised what the problem was, and I realised a couple of months ago actually, the problem is that I cannot garden within the parameters, I can't design within the parameters of expectations of clients. So I have actually taken the step now that unless somebody is prepared to take on board my ethics and can work with the way, you know, the way that I want to work on a site, then I'm not going to design gardens that I don't actually believe in and that I can't wholeheartedly stand by, which means that I'm not specifying any hard landscaping that's permeable. I am specifying lots and lots of planting. I'm not specifying any hard landscaping that needs a lot of materials going into it, so I'm only putting paving stones on things like beds of sand, and if the clients don't like that, then I'm not working with them. And it's hard, it's hit me in the pocket, and but actually in all good conscience, that I think I've decided that's the only way that I can work going forward. So yes, it has massively impacted on me, and meant that my client list has kind of shrunk to almost nothing. So, but going forward, I feel a lot happier about what I'm doing, so it's not all bad.
Follow that. Well, respect. We, I guess, take the slightly more softly approach of, and it all goes back to communications and client relationships, of trying to build in the early conversations. Do you want rainwater water harvesting, composting, and what exactly are you going to be able to maintain in this garden? And wherever we can, we will build in permeable, or we haven't had any great big things for swales or anything like that. I'd love to do some, and it really encourage that way of thinking. We don't always win, but I think you've got to make the effort for sure.
I'm just wondering, try and gauge a scale of how much this is affecting everybody. Just a show of hands, how many people have had the climate directly impact your designs or your design thinking? 4, 5. Also not many. So actually, is there perhaps a sense that this is just this is the British climate, but that it is just quite unpredictable maybe? Actually, one anecdote is I was speaking to one gardener in London who'd been gardening for 20 years or so, and he said 20 years ago he couldn't grow Echium pininana outside in London because it wouldn't survive the winter, whereas now in my garden it's the biggest weed. I can't grow it anymore because it's a small garden, but the entire garden is covered by Echium. I'm endlessly putting it out, it produces so much seed. So it feels like in 20 years there has been some kind of change. So perhaps we're thinking about the next 10 years or so. Cool, thank you. I'm just wondering, just going back to that point around the clients then, do you ever get requests on planting where the client might ask for something that doesn't quite work in that soil, but they're really insistent on it? I was wondering, how do you go about trying to convince them otherwise to change their planting style?
I'm always very firm with my clients. They've employed me because I'm a plantsman. It's very important that actually when they come on board and I've designed their garden, that they are actually in line with my style. There's nothing worse than working with someone who is just, they show you pictures of, heather gardens and dwarf conifers and things like that, and you're like, well, that's just not me. And actually you can find someone who would do that for you. That's just not me. Now I tend to get clients who are familiar with my work. They follow us on social media, or they've seen gardens that we've done, and they like it. There's still often, when you then do the planting, particularly when we've freshly planted, particularly at this time of year, the expectation of what it's going to look like. So I show them pictures and say, oh, well, this is what it's going to look like, and we're planting your garden in December, and you're like, it's all done, and they're like, oh. And then you say, honestly, you will not believe it, but next summer it will look fantastic. And then you just, in kind of April, you get photos of all the bulbs that you've, come up, and then you get photos of, everything literally, and they're like, my God, it just never stops. There's always something that is in flower. There's, we thought that was going to finish, and then it would be nothing, but then that came out. So it's, it's definitely taking them on board the journey that I can see for their space. It's really, I had a client this week actually, I saw them, and a really fantastic plot in Reigate could be an amazing job, and the best part of the garden was on the side of the house, and they wanted a swimming pool and everything, but they were obsessed by a double garage on that side of the house, and that would have meant the whole drive, cutting up the front and back. It was just such a disaster. And I said, do you know what, if you're going to go down that route, I'm not going to do it. And it was so disappointing, because I could see in my head something amazing, utilising the space in the best way. But when clients have a fixation, you just have to let them do it. And I'm old enough now to not take it personally and just walk away and think, well, I'm going to drive past in a couple of years and think, ha, told you so.
I think I've probably made it quite clear that it's my way or the highway, but there have been times when I've worked with clients who have demanded things and I have, again, walked away because it's just not something I can implement. But actually, I've never had a client say to me, no, I absolutely insist on having that there. If I've told them that it's not a good idea, and if I've explained clearly why, then they are always, kind of amenable, and there's always workarounds. Sometimes I've worked on gardens where there's a plant palette that I might not necessarily choose for my own garden, or there's a colour scheme that I'm finding quite hideous. But actually, in the long run, they're sometimes the most surprising and nicest gardens because the people are happy with it, the client's happy, and you can see there's a kind of sense of their personality coming through it. So I don't always just go in and rule with an iron rod, or I haven't previously. Sometimes I think it's nice to channel somebody else's aesthetic, and at least you know that you're making it work for them, but it's still personal to them and it's still their personal choices. So yeah, I think it works both ways.
So far we've been, I think, lucky enough to be persuasive enough to avoid those situations. My partner Frankie particularly is very good at persuading people without them realising they've been persuaded. So they think it was their idea in the first place, which is an absolute win-win. So that's the approach that I would recommend. Take Frankie with you.
Actually, has anybody got any questions at this point? Open up to the floor, just around climate change and especially.
What sort of irrigation
So,
do you have to use it?
so what sort of irrigation is everybody using at the moment?
It's minimal, but it's my preference is for the simplest one. So whether it be leaky hose or the you either get the spongy leaky hose which seeps all the way along, or the plastic with the holes in. Either are good. You've got to make sure the water pressure's even, so they get it gets tested, so it's not really strong at one end and kind of virtually nothing at the others. We did quite a lot of tree planting this year. A garden we did in Sevenoaks actually took the trees from our Chelsea garden, and we had to do kind of a ring irrigation system around the trees, and it was on 2 systems. But as I say, I'm not a big fan of irrigation, and it's so often badly used to the point where this garden in Sevenoaks was not being irrigated enough on some of the hedging, or it being too much irrigated on some of the perennial beds. So I was literally kind of digging stuff out. Even the Strantia, which likes it moist, was literally almost underwater in some areas. So yeah, it's quite tricky.
Seat hoses on bigger sites, but actually loads of my clients amaze me, and they go out there every evening and they water and they get round to all their plants and they look at them and they do, and that's obviously the best way of watering. And they're so good at it. I mean, they're much better than I am in my garden. I just leave things to die. But they go round and they water everything religiously, and they really get involved and get on board with the planting. So I think is brilliant if you can convince them to do it.
Yeah, what she said, actually, I think, and it really invests the clients in their garden as well. They get to know what's going on. And sorry, I've just seen Francesca at the back. I'm just got completely distracted. Get them out there with a hose and their eyes.
So talking about planting, it sounds like you obviously plant the right plant in the right place. That's our job. But do you all have a particular style of planting? Just really quickly, or you're more varied?
I definitely have a particular style. I was strongly influenced, and I think you said actually about the Pete Adolf style of planting. I'm actually not a big fan of his colour schemes. I love his planting in the winter, and I think his, the revelation that brown is a colour was the one of the most important things I ever learnt. But I like quite exciting colour combinations. I find some of his things quite muted. So I like the hot pinks with the purples with the yellow, and I like them quite lively, a lot of lime green. And yeah, I think it's a kind of classic country garden. I don't tend to use anything that needs staking or tying, so it's all self-supporting. That's more difficult in smaller gardens, particularly if you want to use grasses. I learnt to my detriment that if you use miscanthus in a garden with a fence, it just falls forward and collapses on everything else. So a lot of the smaller grasses, the cesslarias now I use a lot. Hacknacloa, I mean, God, where would we be without Hacknacloa? Yeah, so yeah, I think that's my style.
I'm trying to make myself get more into trees because I've always been into short things that flower. But I think last year I tried to work off of still life paintings, so sort of Dutch classic still lifes, and for colours, which was a really good exercise. And I've got this book and it's really naff, but actually there's a chapter at the back and it says get your favourite painting and try and recreate it with plants and flowers, and it's actually really a good exercise. So this year I've been trying to go all out with the colour and just chuck everything in and see what works. But the other thing that I've been doing, which I'm going to do a lot more of, is leave my native plants that pop up. So I had a big stand of rosebay in my garden this year, and it flowered on and on and on, and it looked fantastic. You know, I've got all sorts of little thistly things and little hawk bits and stuff popping up in my borders, and I've just left them, and I'm going to do much more of that going forward.
I don't know about a particular style. We love grasses, we love colour, but I think above all we try and design with wildlife in mind, and a good variety for bees, butterflies, and just about everything you can think of, as much through the year as possible and at all times of the day, morning and evening. I think that's really important with talking about sustainability and everything, and so that's what we aim for. So it was a bit of a shock recently when we went to see a client and said, you know, how much are you into your wildlife? Oh, I don't like wildlife. No, don't like this. So okay, so that's probably where you would have gone by. But we've put it in there anyway. So.
Any other questions from the audience at the moment?
What about the role of shrubs in combination with perennial borders? How do you like to approach that?
Shrubs are definitely...
And which shrubs?
Okay, which shrubs? I do struggle with shrubs actually, and people that know my plant style will be like, oh, that's very not a Nick Howard planting trolley. But I think shrubs are really useful, but the important thing, and I think Dan Pearson drew on this, and Tom Stewart Smith actually, that actually shrubs have to, they're so often misplanted as a, you know, kind of a mass planting scheme. I see the benefits of that with, you know, cornice and the winter stem effects, but yeah, if I'm using shrubs, it's really got to hold its own, and the intention is that when it's at its mature height, it's a standalone, so it's not planting a shrub and then trying to keep it in a certain spot. That's a job for a perennial. So if you want it to, you know, 2 foot every year, you just chop it down and it does its thing every year. Where shrubs, I find, if I go back to a garden, whether I've planted it or not, or if I get called into a garden to be redesigned, it's often completely overgrown with shrubs because people just don't know how to prune them. You know, so from a technical point of view, they're much more demanding. You know, you've got to prune it after it flowers and remove a third of the dead wood and the crossing branch. You know, it's just really complicated. And people are busy and they miss the opportunity to cut it. Whereas perennials, it's like, well, actually it looks dead in March and just chop it all down. So it's a non-technical, you know, with, you know, the exception of some of the tender things. But yeah, that's why I find perennials, you know, a better bet for clients.
Yeah, that is a good point. They are quite low maintenance, perennials are. But I, in my own garden, tend to let things go and see what happens. So one of my side garden was basically all the plants from Hampton Court that were left over, and they got bombed in, and some survived and some didn't. And now what I'm finding is, because I am really wussy when it comes to pruning shrubs, that the shrubs are taking over, and I'm loving it because it's going to be like a big shrubbery eventually, and that's great because why not? Again, they're low maintenance, and it's just nice to see things develop. And yeah, I do try and plant in stories because there is just no point in just filling a garden in perennials. It's gonna look crap at certain times of the year. You know, you need to get some interest in, you need to get some variety, you need to have a kind of layered planting to make it more sustainable, and you're going to need that for wildlife. You know, there's a plethora of reasons why you would include another story to your planting, and I do think it's important, and it's what's going to be like a buffer against kind of things like climate change.
Yeah, I think shrubs are particularly important, particularly the evergreen ones, throughout the winter when everything else has gone to bed. You need something to let your eye bounce around the garden and keep that interest up. Obviously, we're always looking for things that will replace box. We don't specify box now. We're exploring all the pittosporums, things like that. Obviously, we love hydrangeas because they give that extra wow factor of the blousy perennial effect with something that's going to be there again and again. The sorry. And the pruning's an interesting thing. We went to a job the other day to plant up, and the first hour was spent cutting back some shrubs that had just got monstrous. And even just doing that immediately made the garden feel better. And I take the point that that's hard for clients if they haven't got the knowledge to do that. But we try and build that ongoing relationship, so we keep going back, and so we can help with that side of things. And also that gives you an insight in this changing climate when things are so unpredictable. That gives you the knowledge of what has done well and what hasn't done well, and that informs you going forward. And as you said, Sarah, in your garden, I think if you can trial things in your own gardens or go to the Wisley trials and things like that, that's all informing any of the choices through this weirdly changing climate that we're going through.
Can I just add one thing? We were talking about Keith Wiley earlier, and if you ever want to know how to prune shrubs and just experiment, he's fantastic because he chops them in all sorts of ways and trains them in ways you just would never expect. So I think probably be a bit brave with your shrubs as well.
Actually, the biggest problem with perennials, I find, rather than the lift and split, is actually the perennials that are the longest living. So they actually start to dominate and become a monoplanting. So on the lift and split, I would say actually it's more kind of controlled. So things like Persicaria, Phlomis, geraniums to a certain extent. And clients they look at it and go, oh wow, look, that's grown back and it's doing really well, and it's like, well, actually there was a load more in there, and actually it's just being completely dominated. They do definitely need management. Well, I'll just repeat that for the question is saying actually the problem that we're all having with finding professional gardeners. It's a problem that is only getting worse. There is an absolute plethora of people wanting to cut hedges and cut lawns, but then trying to find a qualified horticulturalist to actually come and manage your borders and the perennials and shrubs is very, very difficult. I think partly because actually everyone wants to just be a designer. I'm in my blood. I would be a gardener. I love gardening, and that is my absolute joy. That's my go-to when I'm stressed, and it's just I need to go out and just cut something or prune something and take it out on my plants. But it's an age-old problem, and it's going to get worse, which is why I think it's even more important to do a planting scheme that is sustainable and manageable and not complex. So, someone with very low skill levels can cut down perennials in February and March. There's very little that can go wrong.
But isn't it also our responsibility to make sure that our clients understand they should pay gardeners? So I don't, I'm in South East London, I don't have a problem with having enough gardeners who can look after my garden. But what I've found is that about 6 months after planting, because I keep going back, and I'll say, oh, this needs doing. And after about 6 months, I'll go, well, maybe we do need help. Can you recommend? And I only recommend people that I trust. And I also say to them, this is what they charge. I'm not going to recommend anyone else. I'll give you a choice of 2 to contact, and then it's up to you who you choose.
Well,
there are a lot of good gardeners, but it's
I think the age-old problem is the payment. It's a traditionally low-paid industry. Also, we as a company, we do a maintenance thing. So we charge £25 per person per hour. That is very standard rate to someone who even cut lawns and hedges. But we are specialised plants people. But we find it very hard to charge any more than that. And also, when clients say, "Well, actually, it's quite expensive, so we don't need you in the winter." Actually, that's when we need to be doing all the work that we don't have time to do in the summer. So actually, our garden maintenance team are normally quieter in the summer and busier in the winter for that reason. But yeah, it's an age-old problem. You know, there are always people that are willing to do it for, you know, £15 an hour, £18 an hour. But could be a 16-year-old with a lawnmower on a mobile phone, and they pay that for that, but they won't pay for someone who's been in training for 3 years for it. Sorry, I'm dominating, so I'll pass it.
Carry on, Nick.
Yeah, I haven't really got a lot to add except that Lara did say exactly what I was going to say. It is every designer's job to educate their clients about what is a fair wage for a gardener. £25 an hour is, even that, you're going to struggle to run a business of maintenance people throughout the year. I know I spoke to Outdoor Creations at some point about it because they were talking about the maintenance side. It's difficult. It's really difficult to run that as a business. I used to do it. I had a maintenance business. I couldn't get the staff, and I gave it up. You know, I went into design and now I've kind of moved on to other things. So yes, it's almost impossible. But the gardens are totally reliant. If you build in a lot of intricate planting and things that do need a lot of management, then you are setting that garden up to fail because there is such a dearth of not qualified even. They don't need to be qualified actually. I don't agree with that. The RHS qualifications, good, but if you don't have them, fine, because you could be equally knowledgeable. It is the bottom line is what you're paying people. So yes, if you could all pass it on to your clients, that would be fantastic, and all the gardeners would love you.
Obviously, people pay a lot of money to get their garden designed.
Yeah.
Yet, having a bad gardener come in just
Ruin it.
an hour.
Yeah.
You know, it's just I just can't get clarity. I can't work out what goes on in the
Yeah, absolutely.
Some things you never prove, some things you need to always prove. You know, proving the magnolia every year, you know.
I know, it's unfathomable really, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is, but no, I just don't know. But as you say, the clients are spending a lot of money at the end of the day from start to finish of their process, so why would they throw it away? I think, I guess all we can do is, we're all cogs in quite a big wheel from the get-go, aren't we? Designers, nurserymen, landscapers, the clients themselves, gardeners, garden maintenance, everyone in that has got a role to play in all of this, and I think we just need to make sure we're all recognising each other as much as possible, and communication and relationships has got to be the way forward. But yeah, tough one.
It sounds like I landed on my feet because I've got a really good gardener near me who I work with a lot, and I'm still quite early in my designing career. Any other questions from the audience at the moment? Oh, one at the back.
Bo Kirk.
So should we be experimenting a little bit more with plants that maybe aren't going to do for 11 months of the year, or maybe, like Nick was saying, maybe they will have a slightly shorter lifespan and they'll need replacing, they'll need cutting, or etc., etc. Should we actually, as designers, be slightly changing the way that we are looking at spending our time and money, just to keep things more interesting and to keep Simon in business and stop it having to grow polytunnels and geranium roseanne and not any of the other ones, just throwing it out there.
On the
Pass
spot.
that one
On
to
the spot.
Well, guilty of using geranium roseanne, it's true, because it is just such an amazing doer. But we do try and bring changes around it. And because if we don't, I think, as you say, the nurseries will stop growing everything. There won't be the choice, and we'll just spiral ever downwards into just a set palette of plants. But it is hard because it's your client's money you're playing with, so you need to deliver as much bang for your buck as per square metre as you can. But there'll be occasions where Orion's going to get in there and scramble through high. I remember Tom over at Gravetie pointing that one out to us a long time ago. But yeah, we try and bring the changes and keep it a little bit experimental. But if you mix it up enough within the planting scheme, I suppose you can try a few new bits here and there, and in the knowledge that the rest of it's going to cope and carry on. But yeah, let's keep trying to bring the changes.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I think probably if you smuggle a few in to each planting scheme, it's not the end of the world. So obviously you wouldn't do it with the entire job, but you could put a few in to test out how they go, and also you could sell it to the client on the premise that they've got this rare, unusual thing, and that their friends won't have it. But it is really important in terms of nurseries, I think, to go and visit the independent nurseries and those that are growing, the specialist growers of things, because they know how these plants perform and they're invaluable. And I would always go and ask their opinion on a specific variety or whatever, because I think they're really the experts generally.
I too am a big fan of Geranium Roseanne, but it definitely has its limitations, and you do have to use it carefully. And I've seen it planted, en masse, and actually in the winter it looks really dreadful. So you do need to plant it with a lot of other plants that are going to have a structural quality, through the winter period. But it's one of those things. And Ramon mentioned earlier about the planting plans. I do not do planting plans. I literally mentally die when someone says, "Can you write me a plant list?" I'm like, "Oh, I can't think of anything." And we joke in the office where I go, Geranium Roseanne and Caradonna, and it's like they're the things that just leap to my mind. Put me in a nursery, put me with plants. I will pick the most obscure. I know, I will be always looking for really unusual plants. I've given Simon a long list of things that I found on my travels this year, and he's like, I haven't even heard of that. So it's, I'm always pushing for new plants to use. And, when I look at my planting schemes that I've done this year, there's lots of plants that I've, have not used before. The grass, one of the grasses that I'm using a lot now is the Cecularia family. Absolutely incredible. I used to use the Stipe arundinacea, or the Anamanthale. And never use it anymore. It just dies out. It's one of those grasses that is kind of semi-evergreen, so people never cut it, and then you've just got a big blob of dead grass, in the middle of summer. So yeah, my planting style's definitely changed, and I'm always looking for new plants. But it's when they do recreations of kind of Gertrude Jekyll planting schemes, and they're kind of quite rigid to her planting style. If she was around today, she would not be using a plant that didn't flower for very long. I mean, she would be, advancing with the new introductions. It's just to try and get the nurseries to, support the local growers that are, growing more diverse stuff, and rather than just the kind of municipal planting schemes, which are really quite dull. Simon.
Sorry, can I interject? As a nurseryman and a farmer, and we're taking it back to obviously the climate and how it's affecting what we grow. Well, there's certain plants now that we won't grow based on the fact that disease and pest point of view, and they keep flowering. Well, some of the early flowering, going back to Geranium Roseanne, it's a fantastic plant. The only concern I have with it is it's sterile, which means it can't produce the seeds, and therefore there's no way to stop flowering. So the danger being is if you use it too much, then obviously from a pollinating insect point of view, that's the problem. But when you've got something like Johnson's Blue, you've got War Grape Pink, and when we have these really hot kind of springs, early summers, which are really happy, they're a flash in the pan and they look an absolute mess afterwards. Where we come in as nursery, especially what we do as a niche in the industry, is looking for new plants and kind of will fill a gap. And like you say, Roseanne can look really straggly and untidy, especially in a small garden environment. But there's, us as a grower, we
See everyone noting down as you're rushed, so there's still a lot of those. In it. Yeah. How do actually Simon? How do
Another sport that grows out exactly the same plant with a line of flower. Setting out right magenta pink grows out. So, ask us growers what, you're not just helps around to like one plant, which is plants the centre of right and so. Essentially, they're like plants that come to us and say, right, look, we want that plant of flowers forever. We all want that. Sometimes you want to question why is that there?
without the danger of playing ping pong with Simon, I'd have another question for you specifically. Have you noticed that designers, are we all guilty of narrowing our selection of plants, and should we be doing more to expand it? I'm a bit worried about. I do worry about that, those extremes in weather, because unlike in the Mediterranean where it gets cold but it's dry in the summer, in the UK we have a really weird climate where it can be hot and wet, or it can be freezing and wet, and it's suddenly that selection of plants starts to narrow to those tough ones, particularly when you want it to last over, or maybe it doesn't. It's a good question, I guess. Is it tough, or are we going to end up with all gardens having a narrower of familiar plants which have to last for 3 to 5 years because people don't want, and they're all low maintenance, all tough? Is that the doom and gloom we're facing, or is it more positive than that?
Interestingly, a couple of years ago, we had a really warm winter, and it didn't really dip down into kind of minus figures at all. That spring, we literally lost Geranium phaeum, Alchemilla mollis. I mean, real kind of stalwart plants that you would just think, oh my God, that will never die. But because they just limped all the way through the winter, by the time the spring came, they were so exhausted, they just literally failed. So we had huge gaps where we'd never seen before. And again, that's like a warm, wet winter would do that. Actually, if we got a really cold winter, we would have a lot more variety. And I mean, in Lithuania, it really surprised me what they could grow perennial-wise. They rely a lot more on conifers for the winter structure. They use dwarf conifers instead of box and for topiarized pieces. But they're agastaches and things like that kind of I really struggle with. The blue boa and blue fortune, all of those after 8. I mean, sometimes they could be fantastic. Other times they literally just disappear and they leave an enormous hole. I rarely use Monarda anymore because it's just, a wet, warm summer, mildew. I mean, it's like, oh, that silver plant looks lovely, but actually it's completely covered in mildew. And then it will do 2 seasons, if that, and then completely fail, and you've got an enormous hole in the border. The same with the Achilleas. Lovely plants, but just do not last. So that's one thing, for a client to say, to say to a client, well, this looks great now, but you'll need to redo it in 2 years. They're not really interested, and actually, at the end of the day, they're paying your bill, and you have to select plants, which is why I think we're seeing a, proliferation of the ones that are doing really well. The Rosannes, the Caradonas, the Hacanacloas, the Hydrangea Annabelle, but they're all kind of, I hate to say we're all kind of doing the same thing, but it's the same, across Europe. In Lithuania, it was just really funny. We all mentioned the same plants. Like, oh my God, it's like a worldwide problem. We just have to think, try and think differently, but you do have a client to satisfy at the end of the day. It's a tough brief.
Yeah, it's tough. I think that, as Emma said, we are all part of one kind big machine, and we do need to try and educate our clients and manage their expectations. And everything is not perfect; it cannot be, and everything will not last forever. And it's actually an exciting ride to go through the seasons with your garden, and some things will last and some things don't, and some things get thumped during the winter. And I've got a cineraria in my garden that's been there for 4 years, growing outside, a little bedding silverleaf. I mean, who knows what's going on? Nobody knows. And we need to stop pretending that we do, saying that we do know. We don't know, actually. It is just such a unknown quantity. All gardens are. With the best will in the world, you could be the best plantsman. If you don't know a garden and you're going into that site for the first time, you don't know what the microclimate is there. Unless you're there like a lot of the time, throughout the year, you're just really guessing, and that's all everyone's doing. The RHS is guessing, everybody is guessing. We need to stop going, we've got all the answers, and start going, no, this is a journey. We're all on it together, and let's be a bit more flexible. Let's not stop expecting plants to be perfect all year round. It's an education. It's not our job to educate clients and the general public, but we are part of that kind of education process, I think.
I think the sort of some of the show, when people see a show garden, they expect their garden to look like that, and it's an instant picture that's going to hold on for the rest of the year. And of course, we need to be part of the message that no, that's what we'll give you as a starting point, and after that, you get involved and you edit. Everything's not going to last forever. Some things will last longer than others, and as you said, that's the fun of it, and that's the joy of the ride. There was a great quote I heard at a conference recently, which was, as designers, we put a garden in place, we give you the chords, and the gardeners then take those chords and they jam. And I just thought that was such a brilliant message, because we need to be encouraging them to go out there and enjoy it and work with what they're given. It's not going to be a static picture forever.
Fantastic quote, I love that. It's kind of
That was
having
good,
that team
wasn't
of people that take the garden on. The design is not, obviously, as you know, it's not something that is static. It's a 5-year, 10-year project, even or longer. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Well, I just feel that we shouldn't forget that we are an island. We have a fantastic climate. We are able to grow throughout the country a huge number of plants which are European, Central Europe couldn't possibly grow. And I think we want to accept that we have a changing climate, but we should also grant it to our plants a greater diversity of plants to allow for the fluctuation that comes our way. So I think we should really encourage a wider palette of plants that is being used in our designs. Otherwise it becomes too narrow, and we have this fantastic climate which we shouldn't say we've got climate change. Yes, we have, but we are in a better position than a lot of our partners.
That was a fantastic point. If you didn't hear it at the back, we're being quite negative, I guess, today, because there are challenges. But a spin on that is a positive that we do live in this. As the lady at the front said, there's an opportunity to grow many more plants. We're very lucky with the climate that we have. I love that point as well about planting things just for the one season and going back to that modern take on the old bedding schemes. Perhaps, like, what would a modern bedding scheme be like? It wouldn't be a bedding scheme. It would be something that could fit in with a more naturalistic planting, but only last for a year or for one season. So I like that. There are lots of opportunities. When I grow where I am in Clapham, I can grow cacti outside over winter, which shouldn't survive, but they do. I'm very lucky, so I have a tropical garden with really quite rare stuff. Anybody want to add to that? Is there any more questions? Are we okay for time? Is that all?
Well, lunch is served, but
Excellent. That's fine.
So unless there's any other burning questions, I'll end on a quote from one of our, I'm sure everybody's hero, which I use with great sarcasm, is Donald Trump, who just this week, when his response to all of the reports around climate change was, "I don't believe it," as he seems to say all the time. So on that note, we can all go away and celebrate.
You can stop swearing now.
Thank you to our wonderful panellists, and also to how